15 years passed, and Bisi was no longer the scruffy beggar that terrorized the streets of Lagos. She was now a respected medical doctor in one of the biggest hospitals in Lagos, known across the country for her brilliance in surgery. Her name often featured in newspapers for saving countless lives. However, Bisi lived in complete terror. The crime she committed 15 years ago haunted her every day of her life. It was as if she was reliving the moment over and over. The flames and the unmistakable smell of smoke haunted her dreams as she stood there and watched as the man burned. The only difference was that he was smiling right at her, as if mocking her conscience. His face never twisted in pain, as he wore a chilling smile that sent shivers down her spine. During the day, Bisi wore the mask of a savior, a brilliant surgeon with hands that saved lives. But at night, her hands trembled as the memories of her past came rushing back. No one knew her secret, not even her fiancé, who she was yet to marry in 3 months. But what Bisi did not know was that the past has a way of catching up with a person when they least expect it. It all began one night, after a very long surgery. Bisi walked out of the hospital to her car. She froze in shock when she saw a small box sitting on the bonnet of her car. The smell of burnt wood filled her nostrils as her heart began to race. Bisi peeked into the box and saw a single matchstick and a note that made her body tremble. "Did you think I would never find you?" the note said as Bisi's throat tightened. She scanned the entire car park, hoping to see who dropped the box on her car, but Bisi did not see anyone there. The parking lot was empty, and Bisi wondered how she was found. She had been so careful for all these years, concealing her identity to ensure that her past never resurfaces. Now, she stood here with a box in her hand, terrified to see that someone around knew what she did. She got into her car, her hands shaking as she drove out of the hospital gate, her eyes open in suspicion, her heart beating louder than a drum as she looked through the rearview mirror, her face twisted in fear. Bisi drove straight to her mother's house. She was too terrified to go home, too afraid that whoever left the note on her car was lurking in the shadows. She banged on the wooden door until her mother opened it, her eyes heavy with sleep. "Bisi, what happened? Why are you looking like you saw a ghost?" her mother asked as Bisi stuttered, unable to speak. Her hand shook violently as she shoved the box into her mother's hands. Her mother opened it up and saw the single matchstick and the note. The blood drained from her face as she staggered backwards and slumped into the chair behind her. "It has followed us," her mother whispered. "Bisi, I told you years ago that sins like ours do not stay buried." Bisi knelt before her mother as she began to speak. "Mama, who could it be? We ran. We left Lagos. We started over. I changed, Mama. I changed." Her voice cracked as tears began to fall down her eyes. Bisi watched as her mother shook her head slowly and began to speak. "Change does not erase blood, Bisi. It never does," she said to Bisi, whose eyes shone in disbelief. That night, Bisi could not sleep. She tossed and turned on her mother's couch as the contents of the note continued to echo in her mind. The next morning, Bisi arrived at her house to change her clothes. However, when she got to her doorstep, she froze at the sight before her. A dead rat lay at her doorstep, and next to it was a strange note for Bisi. Bisi could not help but tremble. She picked up the note and began to read. "Rot in peace or confess in truth. The choice is yours," the note read as Bisi's chest tightened. She stumbled backwards, her heels scraping against the tiles, and for the first time in years, Bisi wished that she had someone apart from her mother to share her burdens with. But how could she? Who would believe that the respectable Dr. Bisi, the nation's pride, once caused the death of an innocent man? BC knew what this revelation would do to her career, so she decided to keep it to herself until she figured out who was truly behind it all. As she stood there helpless, a call came into her phone from her big auntie, Mrs. Jackson, the woman who made her who she was today, the woman whose purse she returned 15 years ago, the act that changed her life forever. Mrs. Jackson was inviting BC and her fiancé to her 50th birthday party. She was an extremely wealthy woman, a name that carried weight in every circle that she moved in. Her charity work, her schools, and her hospitals were well known across Nigeria. To many, she was a saint, but to BC, she was the reason that she had a second chance at life. The party was that weekend, and BC decided to swing by Kunle's office that afternoon. To alert him, she disposed of the rat and got into her apartment to change. BC could not get her mind off all that had been happening. She arrived at the hospital, still shaken by the dead rat. BC put on her white coat and walked into the theater, where a delicate surgery awaited her. The patient's family was waiting anxiously outside, and every nurse in the room looked to BC with trust in their eyes. BC tried to steady her hands, forcing herself to breathe normally, but midway through the operation, her mind slipped. The smell of burnt wood seemed to fill her nostrils again, though there was no fire in sight. In her head, she saw the man's smiling face, the one that she had watched burn 15 years ago. For a moment, she froze as the nurses all looked at her shocked. "Doctor," one of the nurses whispered nervously as BC blinked, realizing too late that she had almost made an incision in the wrong area of the patient's body. The nurse quickly pointed it out, and BC forced a smile, covering her trembling hands with forced confidence. "It's fine, I was only double checking," she muttered, though she knew the truth, that her absent-mindedness had nearly cost her life. After the surgery, she locked herself in her office, shaking violently. She had built her entire reputation on precision and brilliance, but now her past was breaking through the walls that she had carefully built. If she made another mistake like this, it wouldn't just ruin her career, it would expose her completely. For years, she had built herself into someone untouchable, the perfect surgeon who never faltered. But now, one slip, one mistake, and everything could unravel. Later that afternoon, her fiancé Kunle walked into her office, his usual charming smile fading as soon as he saw her face. "BC, you look like you've seen a ghost," he said softly, sitting across from her as he asked her if she was okay. "The nurses said that you froze during surgery," he asked BC, whose chest tightened to realize that the nurses had noticed. BC forced a small laughter as she tried to brush it off, saying that it was nothing. "Kunle, it's just exhaustion. I've been working back-to-back surgeries. I'll be fine," she said to Kunle, who did not look convinced. He reached across the desk and squeezed her hand. "BC, you need to rest. The wedding is just 3 months away. You can't keep pushing yourself like this." His words should have soothed her, but instead they made her stomach churn. She wanted to tell him everything. The notes, the rat, the burning face that haunted her sleep, but she bit her tongue, knowing that Kunle would leave her if he ever found out, and BC could not imagine what her life would become if people found out what she did. That night, as she drove home, she kept glancing at her rearview mirror. Every passing car felt like it was following her. Every shadow looked like it was waiting for her to sleep. When she pulled up to her apartment, her blood ran cold. Another box sat on her doorstep. Her hands shook as she picked it up, her throat tightening with dread. Inside was a single photograph, an old blurry picture of her at 12 years old, barefoot with her dirty begging bowl clutched in her hand. On the back of the picture, a message was written in thick black ink. "You can heal others, but who will heal you, murderer?" BC's knees buckled to realize that whoever was behind this did not just know her past, they had proof of it. She stared at the photograph, her breathing shallow. The sight of her younger self, the scruffy beggar, was like a mirror that she had spent years trying to shatter. BC wondered how anyone got their hands on the picture. As she stood there, her neighbor Temi approached her with a flask of food. Dr. BC, I know you are tired and you haven't eaten. I made your favorite, she said as BC tried to force a smile as she thanked her for the meal. Temi was her extremely kind neighbor who she helped one evening when she collapsed on the street whilst jogging. From that day on, Temi had treated BC like family, always checking on her and bringing food for her to eat. Thank you, Temi. BC forced a weak smile, her hands trembling as she hid the photograph behind her back. Temi tilted her head as she began to speak. Dr. BC, are you alright? You look different these days. I hope it's not work stress. BC nodded her head quickly. Yes, Temi, I'm fine. It's just work, she said to Temi as she thanked her for the food and walked into her house. Temi stood there for a few seconds, her eyes lingering on the door, her lips curving into the faintest unreadable smile before she turned and began to walk back to her flat. Inside her apartment, BC dropped to her knees, the photo falling to the floor. She wanted to scream, to tear it apart, but her hands would not move. They are closing in. Whoever this is, they won't stop until I'm destroyed, she whispered as tears began to pour down her cheeks. Days passed and the torment escalated. Anonymous text messages flooded her phone. Sometimes it was just the single word murderer. Other times it was a recording of the sound of crackling fire. BC began to lose sleep, stumbling through her work shifts like a ghost. Even Kunle grew increasingly concerned. BC was now a shadow of herself, and her excitement to get married to him was now non-existent. He planned a dinner for her in his home and invited BC over, hoping to get to the root of her sudden sadness. That evening, BC was preparing to leave the hospital when she received a text from a strange number. It was an image of Kunle's house. The text that followed sent BC running out of the hospital in terror. Will you tell him, or should I go knocking on the door? BC's heart nearly dropped when she saw the message. Her hands trembled so violently that her phone almost slipped from her grip. She reread the words again and again, her chest tightening as the words continued to echo in her mind. Whoever this was, they weren't just lurking in the shadows anymore. They were close, and not just close. Too close. Close enough to know where Kunle lived. BC rushed out of the hospital, barely acknowledging her colleagues as she stormed into the car park. Her thoughts racing at the thought of what the person was willing to do. If they reached Kunle before she had the opportunity to explain, her life as she knew it would be over. Everything she had fought for, the career, the respect, the second chance, would burn to ashes. By the time she got to Kunle's house, her chest was heaving. BC pounded on the door until he opened. BC, what's wrong? You look like you've just seen a ghost, he said to BC, who cut him off, barging past him into the living room, her eyes darting around in fear as she asked if anyone came to his house. Kunle, did anyone come here? Did anyone knock on this door? Tell me, she demanded as Kunle frowned and closed the door behind him. No one came here, he replied as he asked BC why she was asking. BC tried to speak, but her throat felt like it was closing in on her. The words refused to come as her mind screamed for her to tell him everything before it was too late. BC stood there confused, unsure of what to do, when suddenly the doorbell began to ring. Both of them froze. Kunle looked at her, puzzled, as BC's blood ran cold. Slowly, he moved to open the door, but BC grabbed his arm, pleading with him not to open the door. Please don't open it, she whispered, her eyes wide with terror as Kunle stared at her, his mind completely unsettled. BC, who is at my door? He asked BC, whose mouth shook in terror as the words refused to come. The doorbell rang again, but this time longer. Kunle, unable to ignore it any longer, walked cautiously as he opened the door. To his amazement, no one was there, only a letter with his name boldly written on it. BC watched in terror as Kunle opened the letter, his eyes widened in disbelief as he opened his mouth wide in shock. BC wished for the ground to open up to swallow her. She asked what it was, but Kunle could not bring himself to speak. He managed to utter some words as he asked BC when she was going to tell him about it. BC stood there in tears as she began to confess everything to him. how she was responsible for the death of the man who died 15 years ago, and how she fled with her mother out of the state when the police was out to get her. Kunle opened his mouth in shock. He could not believe what he just heard. He dropped the envelope on the floor, and Bisi realized in that moment that the content of the envelope had nothing to do with the death of the man. It was evidence of Bisi's affair with a fellow doctor. Not only had she hidden something so heinous, she was also having an affair with a doctor at her hospital. Bisi tried to explain to Kunle that the affair was not recent, but Kunle sent her out of his house, warning her never to return. She fell to her knees, her tears wetting the floor as she begged Kunle to listen. "Kunle, please, it's not what it looks like. I can explain. Dr. Chike and I have nothing going on. You need to believe me," she said to Kunle, who grew angry as she spoke. "Enough, Bisi," Kunle thundered, his eyes blazing with fury. "Do you think I'm a fool? First, you hide things from me. Now this? A murderer in your past and an adulterer in your present? Who are you, Bisi? Who did I almost marry?" He pointed to the door, his chest heaving in anger as he screamed at her to leave and never return. Bisi's sobs turned desperate as she clutched his trousers, pleading for him to listen, but Kunle pulled her out of his house angrily. Bisi stumbled into the night. Her world collapsed around her. She looked up at the dark sky, her chest tightening with a pain so heavy that it almost crushed her lungs. As she staggered to her car, her phone buzzed again, and her heart could not help but race. It was a message from the same number that left her more broken than she was. "Did you think you could build a new life on ashes? You will lose everything, one secret at a time." Attached to the message was a video, and Bisi tapped to see what it was about. Her eyes opened in disbelief. The screen lit up with a security camera footage. It showed her inside the hospital, leaning against the wall with Dr. Chike. His hand brushed against hers. The camera caught enough to put her into a lot of trouble. They attended the same university, and Chike always had eyes for Bisi. However, when his wife Nazar got pregnant for him, he had no other option but to marry her, although his feelings for Bisi remained intact. Their affair ended a long time ago. Even before Bisi met her fiancé Kunle, Bisi's hand shook as she held the phone tight, her breath coming in short broken gasps. In that moment, she received 2 notifications and realized that the video was posted in the hospital group chat. No one knew who posted it there, as a strange number posted the video and exited the chat. As she stood there shaking, another message arrived her phone. It was the formal invitation to Mrs. Jackson's birthday, which was in 2 days. Bisi did not know what to do. Her knees buckled as the reality sank in. Her secret was no longer hers alone. The video was now in the hands of her colleagues, her superiors, her juniors, everyone who once held her in high esteem. Her reputation, carefully built over 15 years, was crashing down in front of her eyes. Her phone would not stop buzzing. Dozens of messages poured in from the hospital group chat. Some were questions. "Dr. Bisi, is this true?" Others were insults, cloaked as pity. "So this is the saint we've been worshipping." And some were simply laughing emojis. The respect she once commanded was gone in an instant. She slumped against her car, her chest rising and falling as though she could not breathe. And then, as if the devil himself was orchestrating it, another message came. This time, not in the group chat, but directly to her phone. It was a photo. The photo showed Mrs. Jackson's 50th birthday banner being erected in the massive hall where the party would hold. Next to the banner, in a sloppy red paint, someone had scribbled words that made her stomach turn. "The doctor who kills." Bisi's hand shook so violently as she stared at the image. The tormentor wasn't just coming for her reputation inside the hospital. They were preparing to drag her through the mud in front of Nigeria's wealthiest, most powerful and most influential people, and worst of all, in front of the very woman who had saved her from the streets. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind in that moment, reminding her that sins like hers do not stay buried. For the first time in 15 years, Bisi wanted to run again, but to where? There was nowhere left to go. 2 days, that was all she had. 2 days before her tormentor ripped her mask in front of the entire world. And deep in her gut, Bisi knew that whoever was behind this did not just want to expose her, they wanted to destroy her completely. She sat in the darkness of her apartment, her body trembling, her phone screen glowing faintly on the table. The invitation card to Mrs. Jackson's party stared back at her like a cursed object. 2 days, only 2 days, and her life would be over. Bisi could already picture it. The grand ballroom, filled with senators, governors, businessmen, foreign doctors and journalists, the cameras flashing, Mrs. Jackson smiling with her usual grace, and then her tormentor's plan taking shape. She let out a very painful cry, asking why it had to be now. Why didn't you ruin my life when I was a nobody? Why now, when I've changed and tried to make it right? She cried as her phone buzzed again. Another message. This time, it wasn't a threat. It was a video call request from the same hidden number that had been tormenting her. Her blood froze. For a long moment, she could not move. Her trembling finger hovered over the screen until, against her better judgment, she peeked. The screen came alive, but all Bisi could see was a wall clock, ticking as her heart raced in terror. Then a strange robotic voice spoke, and Bisi tried to decipher if it was a voice of a man or that of a woman. She could tell that the voice was recorded and changed, as it warned her to watch her back. The fire that burned that poor man is still alive, waiting to burn you too, the voice said as Bisi screamed out in terror and hung up the call. Bisi had never felt this terrified in her entire life. She sat there shaking as someone began to knock on her door. Bisi refused to go near the door. She was too terrified until she heard a familiar voice call out and ask if she was fine. It was her neighbor Temi, who heard her screams and decided to check in on her. Bisi lied to Temi that she saw a huge rat in her house, and Temi urged her to come stay in her flat whilst her brothers fish out the rat. Bisi tried not to raise any form of suspicion. She followed Temi to her house and sat in her living room as Temi offered to go bring a glass of juice for her. Bisi, in that moment, caught sight of something that made her stomach turn. It was the wall clock that she just saw in the video call a few minutes ago. Her throat tightened, her palms began to sweat, and for a split second, she forgot how to breathe. Bisi blinked rapidly as Temi called out from the kitchen, asking if she wanted ice in her juice. Bisi froze, unsure of what to do. She could not let Temi know that she had figured it out, so she decided to pretend that she had a stomachache to enable her leave Temi's house immediately. Luckily, Temi's brothers had just come out of her own flat, saying that there were no rats in the house. Bisi thanked them as she got into her house and locked the door, her heart racing to realize that Temi had a hand in all that was happening. But what she could not understand was who Temi was and why she had so much info on her. Bisi could not sit back and watch Temi ruin her life completely. Mrs. Jackson's party was the next evening, and Bisi had to do everything within her power to make sure that Temi and her brothers do not in any way attend the party or even come close to the venue. So Bisi decided to do something about it. The next morning, she went to the police to report a break-in. Bisi presented a CCTV footage of Temi and her brothers in her home, accusing them of being behind the break-in. And just like that, the police swung into action, and by dusk, Temi and her brothers were in handcuffs and the police arrested them for theft. Bisi was so delighted, her mind calm, as she began to prepare for Mrs. Jackson's birthday party. The night finally arrived and the party was nothing short of magnificent. The grand venue glittered like a palace and the air was heavy with the perfume of Lagos' most powerful men and women. Senators, governors, international investors, surgeons and philanthropists filled the hall. Flashing cameras captured every smile, every toast, every sparkle of Mrs. Jackson's gorgeous gown as she personally welcomed her guests one after the other. Bisi stood among them, her dress hugging her figure as she smiled at the other guests. To anyone looking, she was the picture of success, the nation's pride, the brilliant surgeon. But inside, her heart beat like a drum. She felt the walls closing in on her, despite knowing that Temi and her brothers were locked away. Halfway through the evening, Mrs. Jackson raised a toast as the waiter approached Bisi's table and placed a small gift box in front of her. Bisi sat there confused as she wondered who sent the gift. She opened it cautiously and froze at the sight of what she saw. Inside was her photo as a beggar, standing as the people lit the man on fire. It was an image of that fateful day, the day that had haunted her for all these years. Blood drained from her face as she stared at the photograph, terrified that something awfully wrong was about to happen. And then a voice rang out from the back of the hall, low, steady and chilling. 15 years ago, she burned a man alive. The nation's pride, the miracle surgeon, is nothing but a murderer. Gasps echoed as the hall erupted in murmurs. Guests turned, searching for the speaker, as the man who she burned alive emerged from the back, wearing a mask to cover his scarred face. Bisi could not contain her tears as she watched the walls of her new life crash down around her. She opened her mouth to defend herself, but no words came as she realized that the past had finally caught up with her, and this time there was no place left to run. Bisi sat there and watched as the man narrated the entire story to the guests. 15 years ago, he began. A little beggar girl pointed her finger at me and screamed, "Kidnapper!" The crowd believed her. They beat me, set me ablaze and left me for dead. Bisi shook her head violently, her lips trembling as she began to speak in a low and pitiful voice. "No, I didn't mean it. I was only a child," she said as the man raised his hand to silence her. The man introduced himself to the crowd as John Jackson, the twin brother of Mrs. Jackson. He went on to reveal that the woman everyone called a miracle doctor built her life on his ashes. She destroyed me with a lie, and I decided to give her everything that she has now. The hall erupted as the guests whispered in disbelief. Journalists raised their cameras as the sound of shutters clicking began to fill the room. Bisi's legs gave way as she sank into her chair. What? What are you saying?" she whispered as the man looked her in the eyes and began to speak. "Did you think it was fate when you picked up my sister's purse on the roadside 15 years ago? Did you think the heavens smiled on you when she took you in, paid your school fees, gave you a home and introduced you to the high and mighty of Lagos?" His scarred lips curled into a smile that chilled every bone in Bisi's body. "No, Bisi, that wasn't fate. That was me." He slammed his fist against his chest. "I sponsored you. I sent the money. I watched you grow from a beggar into a doctor. I gave you the second chance you thought God handed to you, only so that I could destroy you when you believed that you had it all." Bisi's hands trembled as she began to ask for his forgiveness. She could not believe how her careless act of over a decade came back to haunt her in the worst way possible. All the while, she thought her neighbor was behind the weird things that were happening. Little did she know that her worst nightmare was still alive. Bisi dropped to her knees as tears began to pour down her face. "Mr. John, please, I was a child. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't mean for them to burn me. I was only scared," she said to Mr. John, who looked at her angrily and began to speak. "You think that excuse will erase what you did? You condemned me with a single word. That lie was enough for a mob to strip me of my life, my dignity, my flesh, and you walked away like nothing happened while I lay in ashes." Bisi knelt there as she continued to plead for forgiveness. She narrated how the memory had haunted her every night for 15 years. Bisi had truly changed, and Mrs. Jackson could also attest to this. Mr. Jackson, although still hot and full of rage, knew that the Bisi he was staring at now was not the same Bisi that pointed her finger at him and called him a kidnapper. He knew that she had changed, but the pain made it so difficult for him to forgive. However, seeing her now, broken and full of regret, he decided to forgive her, not because she deserved it, but because he had to set himself free from the bitterness. So he forgave her and Bisi was so grateful to him. Despite the fact that her reputation was scarred, Bisi knew that she had received something far greater. She had received mercy from the one person that she needed it the most. She returned home hours later and met Kule standing by her door. Mr. Jackson had called Kule to reveal the truth that the picture he sent to him about Bisi was taken months before she even met him. Kunle decided to compete for her forgiveness. He knew the truth now and could not let Bisi navigate this phase of her life alone. So Kunle became the shoulder that she cried on. He stayed by her side as the world outside judged her because of her past. Kemi and her brothers were finally released from police custody, and Bisi confessed to the police that she lied. She was arrested and spent 2 nights in a cell, an experience that humbled her to the core. When she was finally granted bail, the first people she saw were Temi and her brothers. Shame nearly swallowed her, but before she could speak, Temi stepped forward and hugged her. "We forgive you, Bisi," she whispered softly. "Fear drove you, but you must never let fear turn you into what you're not." Her brothers nodded in agreement, and although Bisi wept uncontrollably, she felt lighter than she had in years. Despite all her mistakes, Bisi did not allow shame to bury her. She chose to keep saving lives, not as the untouchable surgeon people once worshipped, but as a woman who had known brokenness and mercy. In time, the world came to see that she had truly changed. Her story became living proof that no one is beyond redemption, and that sometimes granting a second chance can heal deeper wounds than revenge ever could. The lesson to be learned from these stories is that nothing remains hidden under the sun. Be careful of the seeds you plant today, because you never know when they will return to you. And above all, never accuse falsely, for one lie can burn a life beyond repair. I hope you enjoyed the story.